And a hearty welcome to one and all, back like we never left, with episode 123 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your now Monday evening here in New York with me. If you're checking out episode 123 on the YouTube channel or enjoying the content, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share to those you think might be interested in the channel. Turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. So it's been a while since I've discussed horror movies. I don't know if I could say that's my favorite genre, but it's in the ballpark. And I would say as a genre, I have the most knowledge of horror films, at least from the beginning of the silent period through the 1990s. Yeah. My knowledge is significant, if I can just toot my own horn a little bit. I know a lot of stuff, a lot of obscure films most people have never heard of, going back, as I say, through the silent period. But it turns out that 29 years ago today, long time, I was 21, it was a Friday, and I went to the now dearly departed Movies at Sunrise Mall. I mean, the mall itself is almost completely gone. But the Movies at Sunrise Mall, Massapequa, was my spot to go to the movies. Even though there had been a theater closer, the Pequa Theater, which was in Massapequa, just off Sunrise Highway, the train station over there. Didn't go to that theater very often. And by the time I was old enough to go to the movies by myself, that theater was long gone. I think I was 14 when it finally closed for good. I want to say the last movie that ever played at that theater, Tucker, the Man in His Dream, Francis Coppola. Pretty good movie, I should point out. Not surprisingly, coming from Coppola and Jeff Bridges. But Sunrise Mall was a special place for me growing up as a Massapequa kid. And I really liked the movie theater because they used to have video games and the stand where you bought the snacks and everything. It was just very well put together. Of course, by that point in time, 1995, I had a driver's license. I was in my second semester at New York University. And bear in mind, at this particular juncture in history, the 95 Oscars had just gone off. Pulp Fiction won for screenplay for Tarantino. Forrest Gump took the other major awards. But Forrest Gump, Pulp Fiction, and Shawshank were all playing in theaters on that day. If you go back and Google, you'll see, holy shit, those movies are in the top 10. Yeah, top 15 for sure. But I believe Pulp Fiction finished 6th that weekend. Now, there's no real internet like today. The internet existed in March of 1995, but it wasn't like everything was at the touch of a button. Fucking modems and the dial-up internet was spotty anyway. So I was still analog level. I read the New York Newsday or Long Island's version of Newsday, and I see what movies are playing. Outbreak, great movie. Man, a fucked up medical thriller, which I've joked about on the channel before. Outbreak, I'd already seen. That was #1 at the box office. I wasn't going to suffer through that movie again because when I watched it the first time, I thought I was going to die because there was a guy behind me coughing exactly like the motherfuckers in the movie who were coughing themselves to death. No, thank you. Pulp Fiction was playing at Movies at Sunrise Mall, but I'd already seen it. If I'm not mistaken, I'd already seen it twice in theaters. I had seen Shawshank with my sister at this theater a few weeks prior. I was good. I didn't need to see that again. And Forrest Gump I had seen. The only movie that was playing that there was a chance that I might see, well, 2 movies. One was Just Cause. Sean Connery, star, one of the last movies where he's playing a kind of conventional leading man, even though he was in his 60s at the time. Good movie. But I didn't see Just Cause that day. I kind of wish I did because Candyman, Farewell to the Flesh. You wondered where I was going with this and how I was going to finally get my way to horror. Candyman, Farewell to the Flesh was my choice of movie that day. Now, I was pretty confident it was going to be terrible. It didn't screen for critics. I'm not sure that it's the same process now. I feel like with I don't think it's the same because word leaks out. There's no way to keep things under wraps. But back then, when a movie did not screen for critics, so for example, you open up your copy of a Friday's newspaper in March of 1995, and you have a movie opening like movie Heavyweights. Is that the one where Ben Stiller? Anyway, Just Cause. You open up your newspaper, and here's a 2.5 or 3-star review for Just Cause with Sean Connery. You look for a review for Candyman Farewell to the Flesh. Was not screened as of press time. Doom. That heralded doom. So there were no critical reviews of Candyman Farewell to the Flesh. Now, I had seen the trailer. Trailer looked pretty interesting. Tony Todd back as Candyman. But there wasn't that much information. I wasn't really on the internet yet, so I only had to go on what I read in Premiere Magazine or Entertainment Weekly or Variety or whatever I was looking at the time. Against my better judgment, I subjected myself to Candyman Farewell to the Flesh, the sequel to what I believe is a top 10 all-time greatest horror films, Bernard Rose's 1992 original. I think it's a fucking masterpiece. And as good a literary adaptation as I know of. They took if I'm allowed to say this, a shitty story from Clive Barker. I love Clive Barker. But the story that he wrote called The Forbidden, which was turned into Candyman, is not a very good story. It's not that interesting. They actually really sexied it up for the movies, not sexed up, but they made it a lot more exciting. I read the short story. I'm like, how the fuck could they have turned this into the movie they did? That's how good the adaptation is. Bernard Rose, the filmmaker, God bless him. He also did Immortal Beloved with Gary Oldman about Beethoven, just for reference. And Chicago Joe and the Showgirl with the very young Kiefer Sutherland, Emily Lloyd. Bernard Rose found something in that story by Clive Barker and made movie magic. And Clive Barker was happy as a clam. Now, he didn't exactly say, wow. I certainly didn't write a story as good as what his movie turned out to be, but you could tell he was really happy. That was not a story he thought was ever going to be adapted, because it's not really that interesting. The Forbidden, ooh, it sounds exciting. It's not. So I had seen Candyman multiple times. I had bought a few books which went into detail on the film's production. I was a bit of a Candyman fanboy. I didn't see it in theaters. It came out in the fall of 92. I want to say it wasn't long before Halloween 92. I didn't have a driver's license yet. At that point, I didn't get it till January 93. So I didn't have the freedom of movement to just go to the movies as often as I would like. I couldn't Uber my way to the movies in 1992 either. So I rented it, and then I taped it when it aired on HBO, and I probably watched that movie at least 6 or 7 times. And I talked it up to everyone at NYU Film School who had not seen it. And many people had, especially people in the class, the horror film, which I just mentioned in a previous podcast. But I had been looking forward to Candyman Farewell to the Flesh, and when I saw the death knell not screened for critics, man, I was pissed off. But I figured I could see the Sean Connery movie another time. I owe it to Tony Todd, the amazing actor, the cinematic incarnation of Daniel Robitaille / Candyman from the original. And they brought him back a little bit. He's in about 15 seconds of the 2020 reboot. We'll get to that. So I plunked down my money, and I got my jumbo-sized Diet Coke, and I got my jumbo-sized popcorn for one of the last times at the Piqua Theater. Sometime in the late 1990s, remember here in 1995, we're still in the mid-90s, I seemed to lose the ability to eat popcorn without it feeling as if a nuclear explosion was taking place in my lower GI tract. Sorry if that's TMI. But it felt like I swallowed a fucking watermelon anytime I had more than a couple of kernels. But at this point in time, at 21, I was Gucci. I was perfectly capable of eating a jumbo popcorn with extra butter. And as my dad would say, It's an insult to butter to call that shit they put on popcorn butter, but okay. So I decided to tough it out, will myself to the knowledge that it's very likely this film is going to be horrendous. Can I have one ticket for Candyman Farewell to the Flesh? Yeah. Give the guy the $6 or whatever it was back in March of 1995. I go in, and sure enough, the film is catastrophically fucking terrible. And it's unfortunate because there were actors in it I liked. Veronica Cartwright, she's somebody, is very hot and cold. I love what she does in the original Alien. She's terrific in that movie. I hated her. Hate. Her character. Not her fault. You know, Robin Williams, Good Will Hunting, it's not your fault. It wasn't Veronica Cartwright's fault. The character she plays in The Witches of Eastwick is so bad, and it is such a terrible character. I don't know if it's John Updike's fault writing the novel or George Miller the film. I don't know. But the character as presented is almost, it ruins the movie. So as the movie started and I saw her name in the credits, I said, oh God, I hope she's not playing a character like she played in The Witches of Eastwick. And she kind of does. But that's me. The critics that later shredded this movie, 22% on Rotten Tomatoes, not a good score. That's not the problem. The character is very poorly written. She's not this awful person that she portrays in a weird way in Witches of Eastwick. It's just that the movie could have done so much more with the premise, the idea of they're in New Orleans, and it's Mardi Gras, and it's 90 degrees all the time. There was so much great atmosphere. The director, was it Bill Condon? Richard Condon or something? I think Bill Condon. But the director really set the stage beautifully. And the actress who plays the lead in this one, Kelly Rowan, she did a lot of TV after. She's fine. But the movie immediately dispenses of the lore. It just throws away the lore from the first movie. And honestly, once I heard that Virginia Madsen wasn't coming back, I knew the film was in trouble. Because there was an opportunity to do something great if they had figured out a way to get Virginia Madsen, who plays Helen Lyle in the original, get her back, and get Candyman back. That's the movie that I wanted to see. Without spoiling the original Candyman for you youngins, horror movie fans who maybe haven't seen it, because it is, after all, a movie that is now 32 years old. OG Candyman. The story, it could have been any villain. That's the problem. And what was great about the original Candyman, and in my opinion, the reboot, sequel, whatever, is that it couldn't be just anyone. And this is an issue that I've always had with what Roger Ebert, the late, great Pulitzer Prize-winning film critic, called dead teenager movies. The problem with dead teenager movies is the killer could be any one of an alphabet soup of Leatherface, Freddy, Jason, Pinhead, and unfortunately now, because of Candyman 2 and 3, I won't even go into any detail on that piece of shit, because of that, Candyman Day of the Dead, it could have been any alphabet soup killer you can't kill, as opposed to a guy with a fantastic, rich backstory. A compelling, exciting, dazzling backstory, but a backstory that makes sense for the character and why he is what he is. And Candyman, Farewell to the Flesh, just goes like that. Like Danny DeVito in the movie Man on the Moon. Yeah. It just goes like that. So I watched the movie, and it's just a slasher film with the title. There's nothing to recommend it other than the fact that Tony Todd is still fucking killer, pun intended, as Daniel Robitaille / Candyman. But I was so frustrated watching the movie because it was one missed opportunity after another. From not having the right concept for a sequel, it was so obvious how the sequel should go. It was a cash grab. And Hollywood, hey, what are you going to do? You know, that's baseball, Susan. There are a lot of cash grabs. But they could have made the money if they had simply taken more time, assembled a different cast, different concept, different screenplay, the whole business. So I walked out of the theater. I was angry. Unfortunately, the movie was just as bad as I had feared. Despite the trappings of quality, the filmmaker clearly knew how to set a scene. He knew how to stage action. He knew how to blend practical effects with mechanical. Might have been a little CGI in there, I'm not sure. But the movie is technically fine. It's just the story doesn't do what you want in any way. It's not thrilling. It's not that interesting. The main character, as I say, the actress Kelly Rowan, who's fine, there's just nothing to her character. It doesn't work. And Veronica Cartwright is wasted. They didn't even give her a chance to do anything other than she does a lot of screaming and yelling, as she did in Alien, but that was for a good purpose in an incredible movie. So I never watched Candyman Day of the Dead. The Rotten Tomatoes score on that one is 7%. So Candyman Farewell to the Flesh, which I've just explained to you is really shit, is a 3 times higher Rotten Tomatoes score with that fantastic 22%. Now, I also understand that I don't assess movies the same way you would, for example. So, let's say you are a fan of Candyman, the original. Should you see the sequel? Yes. Don't watch the third one. But there is enough technical proficiency in Candyman Farewell to the Flesh where if you're a fan of the first and you're the sort of person who says, fuck the critics, I don't go by that, fine. See the movie. 22% means that a little bit more than 1 person in 5 thought it was worthwhile. You could be part of that magical 22% comes out saying, Jerry, you're a fucking idiot. This movie was fantastic. Holy shit, what a great horror movie. Fine. I don't care. Don't waste your time with the third one. 7%, that doesn't lie. That does not lie. Needless to say, I have not watched Candyman Farewell to the Flesh all the way through at home at any time. Or we premiered on HBO and Cinemax, which I got back then and came out on video. And people are, you get it for $2. No, thank you. Not interested. It's terrible. Don't want to watch it. I watched the first one many times. It's a movie that I liked and have enjoyed sharing with friends who haven't seen it. Again, the generation gap is that a younger person is more likely to have seen all of the Saw movies, maybe Final Destination, but that level or style of horror more so than old school gritty, where there's at least some elements of reality in it, horror movie. And very few people who I have told about this movie who then went on to see it didn't like it. The old school feel, the way the suspense builds, and the fact that, yes, there's a lot of gore. It is very gory. But the gore doesn't feel out of place because you're not blanketed with it from the beginning. It's actually pretty subtle for a gory horror film. Now, I remember in 2019, and of course, COVID screwed up a whole bunch of shit that had nothing to do with movies. We know this. Not making light of it, obviously. But when it comes to movies, here's what we know. There are a lot of movies whose release dates were moved. In some cases, there were no release dates. Films went straight to streaming. And we saw this in 2020, movies like Greenland with Gerard Butler, which was big budget. It got somewhat of a theatrical release, but it landed on streaming very, very quickly. Tom Cruise's Top Gun, Maverick, was wrapped. The film was done before the end of 2019. Now, the intent always was, it's going to be a summer 2020 release. The Candyman reboot, which actually is not a reboot. Man, Jordan Peele is such a fucking genius. I didn't like Nope. Didn't work. I didn't like Us. Nope. Great concept. Hated the movie. Hated that movie. Despite the fact that, as I say, if I met Jordan Peele, if I were lucky enough, I would say, you're a genius to come up with that concept. And I know that it had some things in common with, I want to say, an episode of, was it The Twilight Zone or The Outer Limits? But still, phenomenal concept. Just didn't like the movie. Did not like it. But Jordan Peele executed an unbelievable misdirection. Now, he didn't direct, it was a very talented filmmaker named Nia DaCosta directed the Candyman, what was called the Candyman reboot. That movie was supposed to come out summer 2020, right around the time of Top Gun Maverick. In this instance, when COVID hit, it was not sent straight to streaming. There was a controversy with Tom Hanks. He made a movie called Greyhound, but he wasn't a happy camper when they dropped it on streaming with Apple because it was made through Apple. Studio, I don't know if Jordan Peele was involved in this part of it, but they decided that they were going to hold Candyman, the 2020 version, the 2020 Candyman. They were going to hold it until they could release it to theaters and get the blanket release they wanted. But he kept calling it a reboot. And he said, well, yeah, Tony Todd is in it. I won't say how big of a role, but we will let you know he is in the movie as Daniel Robitaille / Candyman. But when I saw the previews, I didn't see any Tony Todd. I saw Yahya Abdul-Mateen, a super talented actor. He's in the lead in the Candyman, the 2020 Candyman. So without going too heavily into spoiler territory for that movie, it is not a reboot. I listened for a year and a half as everyone from Jordan Peele on down called it a reboot. It's not a reboot. It's a sequel to the original movie. It's the movie that Candyman Farewell to the Flesh should have been, or at least huge chunks of it, and wasn't. But it is to the credit of the filmmakers, Jordan Peele, who his fingerprints are all over it, and the actors, including Tony Todd, who isn't in the movie that much. Sorry for the spoiler. But it is to their credit that it does justice to the 1992 film. There are actors from the original movie who appear in the new one. And it all works. It's not as good as the 1992 original. It's very well acted, and it has the kind of confident production and budget. The original had a decent budget, but it was not a huge budget film. It was probably 12 to 15 million. Virginia Madsen was a star, but she wasn't pulling down 10 million a movie. She probably got paid 1 to 2 million, if that, maybe even less. But the idea is, for me, Candyman 2020 redeems the franchise. It redeems the crushing disappointment of Farewell to the Flesh, and then the just utter unbelievable fuckery that was Candyman Day of the Dead. I watched about 20 minutes, and it was so bad. I just couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe that they were tarnishing the name of this great horror film character. But then again, you look at the way the Friday the 13th franchise was driven into the ground, and Nightmare on Elm Street to me peaked with Part 4, Dream Master. Dream Warriors, many people consider to be the best in the entire franchise. That was Part 3. The original Nightmare on Elm Street is good. So to me, Friday the 13th movies suck. They all suck. I have never seen a good Friday the 13th movie. Freddy versus Jason, it was entertaining. I wouldn't really call it a good movie. Halloween, Carpenter's original, is a masterpiece, and most of the sequels, I love Jamie Lee Curtis, but most of the sequels, even the most recent one, it's just not that good. I don't find the character interesting. There's something about an unkillable character. I don't know, it just doesn't work. At least with Candyman, it's a vengeful spirit. It makes more sense. It makes more sense to me. But I would say, again, the Candyman reboot is worth seeing regardless. If you're a horror film fan, I actually, now that I'm thinking about it, you're better off if you haven't seen Farewell to the Flesh and Day of the Dead, if you're a virgin, quote unquote, and haven't seen any Candyman movies, watch the 1992 original and watch the 2020 sequel / reboot. See, it's only really a reboot if they make more Candyman movies using that story angle that they developed in the film from a couple of years ago. I'm not sure if that's actually happening. I'd be certainly wanting to see it. As I say, Yahya Abdul-Mateen is a fantastic actor. I loved him in The Matrix Resurrections. There was so much controversy, and this is not criticizing anybody who was upset, mind you. But there was so much controversy when we're like, oh, wait a minute, you mean Lawrence Fishburne's not coming back as Morpheus? You've got Carrie Ann Moss's Trinity and Keanu coming back as Thomas Anderson Neo. Hugo Weaving is not coming back as Agent Smith, but even more so, they're not having Lawrence Fishburne play Morpheus. He's so good as Morpheus. Holy shit, does he pull it off? I love Lawrence Fishburne. I did not miss him in Matrix Resurrections. Again, the core and the concept of that particular story, it wouldn't have made sense to have Lawrence Fishburne as Morpheus, but Mateen fucking crushes it in that role. He is great. And he is very strong in the 2020 Candyman, which wasn't released till 2021. And it ended up, as far as I can remember, it grossed over $100 million at the box office worldwide. And it did really well on streaming because it landed very soon for rent or purchase on Amazon. And a lot of people plunked down their $20 to see the movie when the first time it came to streaming. So it ended up turning a substantial profit. And similar to Top Gun Maverick, is an example of a movie where they waited. They didn't drop it to streaming right away. They waited to have it hit theaters worldwide and ended up being paid off handsomely in every sense of that phrase. But unfortunately, my takeaway 29 years ago today was the crushing disappointment. But history has redeemed Candyman Farewell to the Flesh. We can now pretend that it doesn't exist. Poof. 1992, 2020. It's like Sylvester Stallone in a somewhat joking way. Not so much now because the Creed movies redeems Rocky V. But for many years, and at the time of Rocky Balboa, there was almost an idea in the same way that Trekkies talk about Star Trek V. Well, it's not really canon. Like it's so bad, we don't even want to acknowledge it. Well, it doesn't work that way. But the joke was that Rocky V shouldn't have existed. Let's pretend there's no Rocky V. You can go straight from Rocky IV to Rocky Balboa. It's fine. You could just make some and say, well, he didn't really need all the money. He donated to charity, whatever. You could pretend that Candyman Farewell to the Flesh and Candyman Day of the Dead don't exist. Just go from the 1992 original to the 2020 movie, and you'll be very scared, be fucking terrified. And you'll see how they tie the events of that movie decades later, and they do it brilliantly. I should have just seen Just Cause that day, because Just Cause is a hell of a thriller. Even though on that one the Rotten Tomatoes aren't that high, it was a box office hit. I really like Sean Connery's performance. Ed Harris in that movie, he basically does his version of Hannibal Lecter. And Blair Underwood, an actor I like from L.A. Law, very, very strong in the film. And I believe Kate Capshaw, Spielberg's wife, she's really good in the movie. Her character does some unexpected things in the film. Yeah, Just Cause. The movie I should have seen instead of Candyman, Farewell to the Flesh. And with that, we've come to the end of, and I love that I got to talk about horror today, episode 123 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. And I'd like to thank you for joining me the second time today. For some of you, if you checked out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, are enjoying the content, click like, subscribe, comment, share for those you think might be interested, turn on those notifications. Or if you've caught this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, click like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 124 real soon. Until then, in the immortal words of Tony Todd, Candyman, be my victim. Peace.